Good morning. Today we're talking about the Gilded Age, America's most impressive combination of genius, greed, innovation, and brass-plated hypocrisy. The Gilded Age, roughly spanning 1876 to 1900, was a time of extraordinary economic transformation. The United States went from a mostly agrarian republic into the world's leading industrial power in a single generation. Railroads stitched the continent together. Oil replaced whale blubber, steel replaced wood, electricity replaced darkness, and occasionally common sense. The phrase Gilded Age comes from Mark Twain, who meant it as an insult. Gilded, not golden, thin gold on the outside, rot underneath, and Twain wasn't wrong. This era produced vast inequality, brutal labor conditions, political corruption, and monopolistic empires that would make modern tech CEOs blush. But, and this is where my conservative instincts kick in, it also produced unprecedented wealth, innovation, national power, and a middle class that would eventually demand reform. Two things can be true at once. History is irritating that way. So today, we'll examine how big business developed during the Gilded Age, focusing on four titans: John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, and Adolphus Busch. We'll look at how they built their empires, why their methods were controversial, and why America benefited anyway, even if the road was paved with exploited workers and underpaid journalists. First, context. Big business didn't appear out of thin air like a federal regulation. Several forces drove this explosion. One, natural resources, coal, iron ore, oil, timber. America had it all, and then some. Two, railroads. By 1900, over 190,000 miles of track crisscrossed the nation. Railroads were the first big business and the first big monopoly. Three, technology, new machinery, new energy sources, and new production methods. Four, labor supply. Millions of immigrants provided cheap, plentiful labor. If one worker complained, 10 more were waiting. Five, limited government regulation. This was an era when the federal government mostly believed that markets, like children, should be allowed to learn lessons the hard way. Or, as President Grover Cleveland once summarized federal economic policy, the government should not support the people should support the government. Try running for office on that slogan today. Let's start with the man who became the richest American in history when adjusted for inflation, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller didn't drill oil, he refined it. And this is key. Oil refining in the 1860s and 1870s was chaotic, inefficient, and wildly dangerous. Explosions were common. Quality varied. Prices fluctuated. Rockefeller hated disorder. He believed chaos was immoral. His company, Standard Oil, succeeded through three main strategies. One, vertical integration. Rockefeller owned everything: refineries, pipelines, rail cars, storage facilities, barrel factories. If oil touched something, Rockefeller owned it. Two, horizontal integration. He bought out competitors or crushed them, sometimes politely, sometimes not. Often, he'd offer to buy a rival's refinery. If they refused, he'd undercut prices until they folded. Three, railroad rebates. This is where the ethical alarms go off. Rockefeller negotiated secret rebates from railroads, meaning he paid less to ship oil than his competitors. This was legal at the time, but deeply unfair. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of America's oil refining capacity. Rockefeller famously said, "Competition is a sin." That quote alone could power an entire antitrust hearing. Now, I'll say this: Rockefeller did reduce prices, improve quality, and stabilize supply. Kerosene became cheaper and safer for ordinary Americans, but monopolies, even efficient ones, undermine markets, limit innovation, and eventually demand political power. The government agreed, eventually. In 1911, Standard Oil was broken up under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Rockefeller spent the rest of his life giving away money, possibly to improve his standing with God or Congress. Next, Andrew Carnegie, the apostle of steel and the patron saint of free libraries. Carnegie arrived in America as a poor Scottish immigrant and worked his way up from bobbin boy to steel magnate. He believed deeply in social Darwinism, the idea that wealth flowed naturally to the most capable individuals. Carnegie's steel empire rested on three pillars. One, vertical integration. Like Rockefeller, Carnegie owned mines, mills, railroads, and shipping lines. 2. Technological innovation. He adopted the Bessemer process, allowing steel to be produced faster and cheaper than ever before. 3. Ruthless cost control. Carnegie paid low wages, crushed unions, and demanded constant productivity gains, which brings us to the Homestead Strike of 1892, a violent labor conflict where Carnegie's manager, Henry Clay Frick, hired Pinkertons to break a union strike. Shots were fired, people died. Carnegie was conveniently in Scotland. Carnegie later wrote, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced," which is a noble sentiment after you've died rich. To his credit, Carnegie gave away over $350 million, funding libraries, universities, and cultural institutions. If you've ever studied in a Carnegie library, you've benefited from industrial capitalism and someone else's 12-hour shift. Now let's talk about Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor in American history, and also one of the most aggressive businessmen. Edison held over 1,000 patents, but he didn't work alone. He ran invention factories, early research labs staffed by engineers whose names history forgot. Edison's business success came from 1. Patent control. He aggressively defended his patents and sued competitors relentlessly. 2. Systems thinking. Edison didn't just invent the light bulb. He built entire electrical systems, generators, wiring, meters, power stations. 3. Ruthless competition. During the War of the Currents, Edison tried to discredit Nikola Tesla's alternating current by electrocuting animals in public demonstrations. This is not the behavior of a man who fears Judgment Day. Edison once said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work," which is inspiring, unless you were one of his underpaid lab assistants finding those ways. Eventually, Edison's companies merged into General Electric, one of America's first corporate giants. Finally, let's raise a glass, figuratively, to Adolphus Busch, co-founder of Anheuser-Busch. Busch revolutionized brewing by 1. Refrigeration. He pioneered refrigerated rail cars, allowing beer to be shipped nationwide. 2. Pasteurization. This extended shelf life and ensured consistent quality. 3. National branding. Budweiser wasn't local, it was national. Busch understood advertising, trademarks, and consumer loyalty long before Madison Avenue existed. Unlike Rockefeller or Carnegie, Busch didn't monopolize an entire industry, but he industrialized consumption itself. In doing so, he helped create a national consumer culture, something we now take for granted every time we buy the same mediocre product in all 50 states. So how should we judge these men? They were innovators, builders, and risk-takers. They helped make the United States an industrial powerhouse. They raised living standards and lowered prices, but they also concentrated power, exploited labor, corrupted politics, and treated competition like a disease. The lesson here is not blind worship of markets nor blind faith in regulation, but balance. Markets need competition. Power needs limits. Prosperity without accountability eventually eats itself. As Theodore Roosevelt later warned, the absence of effective state and especially national restraint upon unfair money-getting has tended to create a small class of enormously wealthy and economically powerful men. In other words, capitalism works, but only in a system that promotes competition as a priority. The Gilded Age was loud, dirty, brilliant, unfair, and transformative. Its big businesses built modern America, sometimes nobly, sometimes brutally, always ambitiously. And if nothing else, it teaches us this enduring truth. Americans are very good at building things, and just as good at arguing over who should control them. Thank you.